Hi everyone! I hope you're all having a great week. Here are the supplies I'm going to be using this week for my watercolor abstract. First things first, I start with, in this case, Arch's watercolor paper. And I didn't use the whole entire sheet. I basically cut it in half. I like to tape my paper to this plexiglass. Taping the paper to the plexiglass helps prevent the paper from warping as you're working. Speaking of tape, this is the kind of tape I like to use. I get it from Dick Blick's. And the next thing, of course, that we'll need, or that I'm using, is my watercolor palette. This is a small little palette that I got on Amazon. It's called Decadent Pies, and I really love it. It's probably my favorite palette. I love it for a number of reasons. There are a lot of colors in it, for one, that I really love. There's a really beautiful gold in the palette that I have used a lot as well. I also can use it to mix skin tones. So I like this palette for that reason as well. It's got a lot of really nice colors. I also am using these little dishes. These are just things that I got from a Christmas gift, I think, as like, it wasn't even an art supply, but it came with a number of different oils and vinegars and whatnot, and I really like the little dishes, and we weren't really going to use them for the purpose they were intended, I guess. So I decided to use them for watercolors, and they work really well for that. So I'm going to be using some of those. I'm using a number 14 round brush by Artist Brush, a number 5 round brush by Benici. And I'm also using this little micro mini brush because I like to make little tiny marks, and this one works really well. I'm using crochet needles. I don't use them to crochet. I think they're crochet needles, and actually I'm not even 100% sure. So if any of you know what these are, you can let me know in the comments. I don't use them for their intended purpose. I use them for other things. I do a number of different things with them. For this project in particular, I'm going to be using these ends so that I can basically stamp little dots into my painting. I'm using a black marker. This Zig marker I really like. I use it quite a bit. I like it because it's got 2 different tips, and I use mostly the 0.5mm tip in this project. But I'm also using this Varsity fountain pen by Pilot. I like it because the ink flows really well from it, and it also has really dark ink, which I really like. So I work with this pen quite a bit. And I'm also using a white Uniball Signa broad pen. This is one of my favorites. I love Posca pens, but they don't always work really well when I'm working with watercolors. These work every time. Sometimes I do need to take the tip and rub it against a piece of paper or something if it gets a little bit clogged up because of the watercolors, but the color is very opaque, and I like how it applies. And of course, I always like to encourage people to use whatever you have on hand. It's you probably have your favorite art supplies, and I'm sure you can create something equally beautiful with what you have on hand. One quick thing I forgot to mention, of course, I'm working with watercolors, so I will be using water, and I also work with paper towel. I like to keep the paper towel so that I can create other projects with it. You see that, you know, by dabbing the paint on, it creates these really cool patterns and stuff that I really enjoy. So not only is it better for the environment for me to get most of the paint from my brushes off on a paper towel like this and then reuse it in a project, it also doesn't go down our water supply, and I think that's also better for the environment. So that's how I basically work, but you could use a rag or whatever feels most comfortable to you. So enough about all this, let's get going with my video. The very first color I'm applying at the top of my paper is a very light wash of a mixture of Blackberry, blueberry, apple, and pecan. And these are the names of the colors from this specific palette that I'm using, Decadent Pies. It's the only color that I'm mixing for this project. All of the other colors will be used straight from the pen. When I'm creating intuitively, I also like to experiment, and it's by experimenting that I discovered how to create this beautiful grayish color, and I've used it quite a bit in a lot of my different projects. While the paper is still wet, I start to apply a small amount of white mocha. It's a bit of a silvery white color that I really like, and I think it will look really nice in combination with the colors I intend on using in this project. Though I don't have an exact plan for what I'm going to be creating today, I do have an idea of the colors that I want to use. The colors I choose to work with often create that first spark of inspiration in what will lead to my final product. The next color I'm going to be working with is this earthy red called Apple. I'm mixing it with a lot of water on this little dish that I'm using, and I am just starting to create a first initial wash of color. Here I've decided to add a little bit more of that apple in a less diluted form so that it creates more contrast between each color. With the intent of continuing to create contrast, I've also decided to add this darker blue to the top portion of my painting. As I'm continuing to paint, I'm starting to get more and more of a geological feel to my painting, and this is sparking some new ideas for what I'll do next. I'm a very curious person, and I love to learn about almost anything. Before falling asleep at night, I often will watch documentaries. And recently, I rewatched a documentary series called Voyage of the Continents. This documentary talks about the continual evolution of our Earth's crust. And as I'm working on this painting, I'm starting to feel like what I'm seeing here is almost like the layers of the Earth's crust, and so I'm inspired to continue exploring this idea. While you're making the time to watch this, I just wanted to take a minute to again say a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching, subscribing, liking my videos, and who've commented on my videos with such kindness. It really feels so nice to have this support, and I am so appreciative and thankful that you have decided to join me on this journey. In just a few short weeks, my channel has made it up to over 680 subscribers, and I am just blown away. So again, a huge thank you. Once my background is dry, I'm ready to start working with my markers. I've decided to draw in 3 different lines, and within these lines I'm going to start drawing some rocks that are within the layers of the Earth's crust. All I'm doing here is drawing in a variety of different shapes that look like rocks. And once I'm done drawing them in, I will basically color in the spaces in between the rocks. This process is somewhat similar to what we do in neurographic art. This type of repetition encourages the mind to focus on very simple tasks. And by doing so, it also increases the body's ability to relax into being in the moment. Once I was done coloring in the spaces in between my rocks, I decided to start creating some stippling. Creating the stippling along the edge of the rocks just above inspired me to start creating rocks with my stippling. The shapes of the rocks I'm creating will be similar to the rocks I've created above, but they will contrast in color, and they will also contrast with the fact that they have been created using this stippling. Stippling is another mindful activity and technique that helps to focus the mind on a very simple task that is also extremely relaxing. As I mentioned at the start of my video, I really like the gold in this color palette, and so I've decided to add some of it in my painting as well. Then I pulled out my white pen to do yet a little bit more stippling and also start to do some line work. In order to let this layer of ink dry, I've flipped my painting over so that I can now start working on the top part of my painting. My line work is often as simple as just following the lines that the paint has created while it was drying. Always with the intent of keeping things simple, I've decided to create some line work at the very top of the painting. And as you can see, it's just some very simple vertical lines. At this point, I've decided that I want my 2 layers of rock to be the focal point of my painting. So I've decided to add some stippling at the top edge of the rocks in order to make them stand out more. While this stippling dries, I've flipped my painting again and I'm starting to add more gold detail using my small brush at the very top of my painting. Now I've decided to stamp in some gold dots. In order to create balance in my painting, I've decided to recreate some of the details from the top on the bottom of my painting as well. I won't recreate them exactly the same way, but I want to repeat some of the elements again to create more balance. Now I'll add in some more gold dots, but this time instead of adding them into just a plain background, I'm adding them directly on top of my stippling. Now I'm feeling satisfied that my painting is complete and it's time for me to remove the tape. I don't know why I enjoy this part of the process as much as I do, but it definitely is very satisfying to see that tape coming off. And there we have it. The painting is complete and I really enjoyed creating it. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!